Hey everybody, welcome to the Novachenko Whips YouTube channel. This is Ilya here. So I thought I could record a video tutorial on some of the basics of open source tuning your Subaru. I've had plenty of requests similar to this where people say, hey, it would be cool to get a remote tune, but I also want to learn. And I honestly started this channel in a way, hopefully being able to teach people how to quickly and easily pick up the basics of open source tuning instead of just tuning their car and retaining that knowledge and trying to keep it locked down. I feel the purpose of open source was to let people learn and modify their cars and then also get into the tuning, so both hardware and then the software in the ECU. I presume you've already gotten RomRaider and ECU Flash downloaded and set up. I know it's a difficult process, sometimes depending on the Java version you're running on your Windows machine. But I'll pick up here. Pretty much what's happened is I've received a bunch of log files. You can see here, first through sixth, light throttle driving, fourth gear pull, third gear pull, and then it's from an 11 STI map that someone is running. I think they grabbed it off of one of the forums and they're trying to figure out how do I tune my car, modify this map to best fit my car, which is a very valid question. Exactly how I started, right? When I first learned to tune, like you think, all right, there's a lot of things in the map. What in the world do I begin with? So let me open up this map with ECU Flash. For the 11 STIs and WRXs, I've noticed for some reason RomRaider editor, the definitions might be lacking, although I've tried to download all the known definitions there are. Sometimes I'll try to open various years and models of ECUs, and there's not enough definitions to open it up in here, but I've found that ECU Flash usually has what you need. The reason why I'll have RomRaider still open is I'm going to use it kind of as a middleman to a tool that I'm going to show you soon. Okay, really quickly. When you open your map, I usually save it as a bin file. I think there's also another format, but either way works in terms of flashing on your car. You'll see on the left side, there's a lot of stuff. So in a tune, or, pretty much a image of your ECU, these things over here are called tables. And this whole thing is called a map of your ECU. So it's going to look very similar on a lot of Subarus. The newer Subarus have a lot more compensation tables. But you could almost break it down into these categories. So from the top, target boost, boost limits, wastegate control, the turbodynamics, which means the amount of control and adjustment that the ECU will make to the wastegate to try to hit your target boost settings. Manifold pressure sensors, so that's your boost sensors. Primary open fuel, very important one for all the fueling. Closed loop fuel, that's for like steady state and light throttle driving. Then there's the transitions from closed loop to open loop, which are very important in terms of delays. So usually, someone's already set this delay to 0. That's good. Oftentimes from the factory, they set that really high in terms of milliseconds, and it takes your car forever to switch out of closed loop. Again, we know closed loop is reading all the sensors and using that to make a lot of adjustments for fueling. Open loop is you've gotten past a threshold where you've given it so much throttle that the car is just going to use your data from the map and strictly provide that amount of fueling into the engine. All right, injector scaling and latencies. So these are important for injectors. Again, this is a stock injector, 560cc. Thus, the latency values are what they are on a stock car. If you upgrade your injectors to, let's say, the Injector Dynamics 1000s, 1500s, it's very easy to go online, like 1050 latencies. Go to their website, and you're going to pull up. There's like a nice sheet that they give you. I probably can't find it right now. I have it bookmarked on my phone, but pretty much when you find those data sheets, they will show you and tell you the exact values that should be going in for these battery output voltages, and then also for the manifold pressure values. And so you'll be changing these most definitely. These change as your injector sizes change. And Injector Dynamics works the best. I've used other brands of injectors and they don't always work nice, even with their data sheet that they provide you. So bear that in mind. Moving on, there's a section for fueling and cranking. A lot of these things you don't really touch, especially if you're just making some modifications. You know, most people are getting a intercooler, an intake, a downpipe, an exhaust, some injectors, a blow-off valve, bypass valve, and things here and there. I'm going to go over the main things that you focus on in terms of that. And then you could always click through all these and hit the info button to try and understand what in the world it means, because some of it is confusing. Tip-in enrichment, it is what it sounds like. It's when you tip in the throttle. That's how much more fuel is dumped into the cylinder according to these conditions. Again, I usually don't mess with that much unless you go like really big injector. And for example, the tip-in additional injector pulse is just too much and it starts to flood your car. Let's say you're like way up there with like almost a 2000 cc injector, then you would probably take the ratio. Let's say you went from a 500 cc to 1000, you would possibly cut these numbers in half, but that's not always a fact. So bear that in mind. With injector changes, you do first change those main numbers, and then you play with these going forward in terms of how the car feels good with tip-in and that closed loop to open loop transition as you go into wide open throttle. All right, warm-up enrichment is what it sounds. Air fuel correction learning, that's again the closed loop, how much correction the ECU is allowed to make. The negative 25 to 25% is pretty standard. These are also standard values here as well. I would keep those within, I think 6% is fine. This is a big one, MAF scaling. I'm gonna get ahead of myself. MAF scaling is pretty much one of the main things you need to dial in with your intake for your car to run smoothly. You'll notice here, this is a very pretty, very smooth MAF sensor scaling. I'm sure someone's worked a lot on this if it's modified. The ideal scaling, let's say trajectory, might look a little different for your car depending on how your intake is set up. And we have a log here that we're going to run in a MAF scaling tool that I use and that I have that will really help you dial in these numbers. If you don't have that tool, it's a pain to calculate each one of these flows per voltage of the MAF sensor. Trust me, the tool is a lifesaver. So I'll share that in a bit. Cool. Going on, timing tables for all the advanced stuff. Usually the most important stuff is just the base table and then the knock correction. To look at it, looks like here, very much towards red line, we're hitting up to 17 degrees of timing at full load. And then it looks like there's a possible additional 2 degrees there. So 17, 18, 19, that's pretty aggressive in terms of timing on that part. So we'll see what we can do to adjust here. I'm mostly going to go over the basics again. So to speak about timing in general, just so I don't forget, I've seen Subarus, highly modified Subarus on pump gas. Let's say if you have 93 gas, that's slightly better than what we have here in Washington. The cars that run about 20 degrees of timing at wide open throttle, full load, that's pretty aggressive. So that's what I'm seeing here. Think about it as like towards red line, that's more okay than at 4,400 where you're probably coming on to your full boost. That's why here I see you're at 5 degrees at 4,400, and then you can add the additional 4,400, 4 degrees. So it's like about 9 degrees of timing. It's not crazy aggressive. It's possible that in the future you can play around with this number to maybe get this timing here when you hit peak torque. You know, that's when your turbo spools to maybe up to 15. Some cars are happy with it, some cars are not. It's really a combination of cooling mods, fueling, compression, everything is involved here. So again, my recommendation with timing is don't make big jumps. A lot of tuners, what they will do, these compensation tables, correction, advance, max, cruise, and non-cruise tables, some tuners will completely zero these out so that the ECU doesn't have as much freedom to give this like add or remove type functionality. What they will do, they will put all zeros there, and then they will strictly put their desired timing in these base tables. And that way, if there's knock, yes, the ECU will pull back timing, but at least it's clear as day, like what the total desired timing was at that, load, engine load, grams per revolution, and at that RPM, revolutions per minute for the engine. While I'm here as well, I'll speak a little bit about load. A factory tune, this looks like a factory tune in terms of scaling. So imagine this, let's say your car generates more than 2.95 load because you're going way over the factory boost rating. Let's say factory, they were going like 14, 15 PSI, and they were probably maxing out around 3. I see STIs that run 20 plus PSI go up to a load of 3.5 or 4.0, but your table only has this number of rows and this number of columns. What tuners do, because you want more control as you start hitting higher load, you can pretty much reuse these last couple columns and rescale. So instead of a 295 here, I would put like a 3.5, then I would do something like a 3.25, and then go put a 3 in this one, and then keep scaling down. Probably put like a 2.8, 2.6, and then 2.4. So pretty much moving these values over, rescaling this, and then adding that overhead in terms of the additional load numbers up top. Because what happens here right now is your car hits 2.95 degrees of load, you give it this timing, and then any amount of more load that the car sees, it keeps giving it this same timing. This doesn't dial down. It stays exactly, it continues forever with these numbers, and these numbers continue forever. That's all it continues to use. Let's say this is in fact like a area of 15 PSI, but then imagine 15, 20 PSI with the same timing. That can be a big difference for detonation, for power, and things like that. So it's as easy as hitting the equal button, 3.5, and you've pretty much, in a way, rescaled the table. Of course, now you have a big gap between these two columns, so you'd need to kind of bring it back and, smooth it out so that there's not these huge gaps. But I think you understand what I mean. So I'll put 295 back for now. All right, I kind of jumped into timing head first, so I'll move on. There's a section for timing compensations. These are fun to click around. So for example, if you have really cold intake temps and it's like the winter, you can bump the timing a little bit. If it gets really hot outside, you can take back or pull back timing, because this will help mitigate knock. Knock is bad. Number one rule of tuning. Engines, a lot of gasoline and any kind of fuel, internal combustion engine, maybe besides diesel engines. I don't even know if diesel engines knock, but they are knock limited. There's also feedback knock control. So this is what happens when you see knock. You want to be able to pull back and allow the ECU to pull back timing. I usually don't mess with these. What you do want to put here, you can see the factory ECU sets you at a health, advanced multiplier, initial. A lot of, let's say if people are used to the Cobb access port, you'll monitor this as the IAM or the DAM value. On the 16-bit cars, this can go between 0 and 16. On the 32-bit cars, this goes between a 0 and a 1.0. So here's what happens. You go pull off the battery off your car, put it back. The ECU learning has cleared, everything's cleared, the tune is still there. When you start the car, it's not going to give you full timing. It's not going to give you full everything. You have to drive it around a bit so the car recalls that it's healthy and happy, and this number will grow, let's say, over a period of time. It's usually pretty quick if your car is in fact happy. But for you and your tuning purposes, you want to start this out at a 1 because you don't have time to wait to go drive around half a day for that value to climb to a 1 to know and be able to test your maximum settings for timing, for boost, for fueling, and so on. So I'm going to save that. We want 1.0 there. AVCS cars, you can check out how AVCS works in terms of the AVCS Advance. You will notice that AVCS really is useful under 4,000 or right around 4,000 when you come on boost. It helps you come on boost. It helps the throttle be more responsive, especially the intake side, and helps with turbo spool. After you've spooled the turbo, messing with AVCS I think can be pretty detrimental because you're already forcing air into the engine. Most tuners don't mess with it after that. The exhaust side, you'll notice, I don't know, on this map, they're just setting the exhaust to 17 degrees. I guess that's just slightly prolonged. And even in when you're not in cruise, this is more of like a wide open throttle scenario. They're setting the exhaust side open to 20, which most likely is just opening the exhaust valve slightly longer to get more of an exhaust pulse out there and to, you know, spin your turbo and make the car feel nice and giggity. Okay, I'm going to move on. So also the 2011 cars or certain newer cars, they have the drive settings, intelligent, sport, and sport sharp. You'll see those 3 maps here. So here they are. These pretty much all they do is change the requested torque per the percentage of throttle angle or pedal angle that you have. For example, at the bottom right, you're going to see intelligent. So it only goes up to a 300. The sport goes up to a 350 requested torque. And the sport sharp goes up to a 430-ish requested torque. Again, it's the requested torque. This all correlates back to the boost and wastegate tables. That's why when you went to those tables, you saw that it correlates to requested torque because now you can control the amount of boost you get in those settings. When I had my 2008 STI, I programmed the intelligent to be very smooth, you know, very comfortable and efficient. And that way I would limit it to like 17 or 18 PSI of boost. Sport was like 20, 21 PSI. And then my sport sharp was kind of like a kill map. I think I was hitting like 24 PSI on a stock block. Don't do that if you don't want to do head gaskets regularly, so to speak. You can tune your car to run at 24 PSI. You'll definitely have to play a very fine dance with the timing. You're going to have to dial it back most likely. It's always a combination of timing and boost, and you have to find the happy place where your car's happy with the timing and the boost, and then you can bump one up a little bit, see if the car knocks or not, then bump the other and find that happy medium. As I mentioned before, a moderately tuned Subaru will run anywhere around 15 plus or minus degrees of timing at full load, wide open throttle, you know, probably slightly higher towards redline, but I'm talking about like that 4,000, between 4,000 or 5,000 range where you're coming into your really heavy boost and most torque. And then, you know, that will all depend. I've tuned cars which were unhappy with 15 degrees. I had to tune it down to like 12, 11 to get it to not knock. Again, it could be a combination of things. Cooling, airflow, TGVs are too restrictive, etc. And then I had my car, again, it was running like up to 20 degrees at 24 PSI. I was dumping a lot of fuel in there. I had a lot of cooling mods. I wrapped everything I could in terms of exhaust under the hood. I had a front mount. I had a cold air intake. I tried to make that car flow as much as possible. I was squeezing all the juices I could out of my stock block, so to speak, as an experiment. And being a tuner, you kind of experiment on your own car to see what these cars are capable of. And I did it over a span of months. continually refining the tune, changing things, logging, and seeing what it did. Okay, miscellaneous. Rev limit. So you can change your rev limit. It says here that your rev limiter will turn on at 7,000, and then, you know, you'll get your engine back as it drops right below there. You could, you know how people like their little funky rev limiter where it like actually makes a funky sound? You could make the gap between those two bigger. And so, you know, stuff like that. The open source software doesn't have launch control or flat foot shifting built into it, but there is a patch. If you Google it, there's a guy that sells patches for the various years of cars with instructions. You would use a script that he provides you and instructions to grab either your bin file or the SRF. I don't remember which one. It's pretty straightforward. It just takes like 20-30 minutes, and he charges $50, and you can program launch control and flat foot shifting. It, in the end, pretty much shows up somewhere down here as another section. I'm trying to see if it already has it here or not. I don't see it. So most likely not. Okay. So that's that section, miscellaneous stuff. And you have a lot of sensor scaling. A lot of it you don't touch because it's the same as factory. Radiator stuff is nice for summer. You can lower the degrees at which your radiator fans turn on. I usually did this on my car because I'd prefer my car to run a little cooler, knowing that you're gonna, you know, drive it and enjoy it and want it to stay cooler. Also, idle speed bump. If your car has a lot of mods and it has slightly, it feels rough at low idle, or if you ever come to a stop and the car kind of dies on you, you want to bump the idle a little bit. And last but not least, something that open source is really nice to have for is various code deletes. So secondary air pump deletes, TGV deletes, evap deletes. Don't delete every code. My recommendation to you. So let's say you're getting knock or a misfire, and you're like, dude, I'm so sick of this misfire code. Do not remove the code. Go fix your misfire, okay? Like, go change the spark plug, go change the coil pack. If it continues, investigate what's up. You know, get a compression test. These codes are here for a reason. A lot of them, yes, are very much emissions related. Like, look at the number of TGV codes there are. Look at these OCV solenoid codes. There's like 50 of them, and then there's like 1 or 2 for misfires. Secondary air pump, there's like 10 codes. So when you throw all that trash out, put on the block-off plates, you remove all these codes, you won't have a limp mode. It's beautiful. Okay, I'm going to take a super quick break and come back and show you everything I meant about MAF scaling. All right, let's get on to the editing part, right? Where's my screen brightness? Okay, so before I do that, if you haven't done so already, go to MAF scaling tool. You'll just Google MAF scaling tool, and it'll be done by this guy called Vimsh. You'll get to go to his page on GitHub, and this tool is awesome. So download this tool off his GitHub, either the zip or the tar.gz file, and I'm going to open it up for you. This tool is the best to do like the boring stuff, so to speak, about tuning. So imagine this, for example, Cobb. When you get a Cobb intake, you want to use like the Cobb stage 1 tune. The main reason for that is they really dial in the MAF scaling for their intake. If you get like a different intake, or if you have ever had a different intake and then you ran like a Cobb stage 1 tune and your car felt rough, this is the main reason why. Would explain that. What happens is your MAF sensor reads at voltages. And in this table, you tell it, hey, at 1.0 volts, your reading or your intake is grabbing this amount of air. And as we looked here, I'm just going to go to the MAF scaling table. MAF scaling. The maximum just says you can have a maximum of 600. That's a lot. Usually this number's at like 500-ish for modified cars and like 400 for stockish. And so let's say you're at 1 volt it's going to technically be saying like, hey, you're getting 2 grams per second in terms of mass of air. So this is like around idle. It's actually lower than idle. I think at idle you set it around like 1.7, 1.17, 1.2, sometimes 1.3 volts. And so your engine is consuming about 3 to 4 grams per second of air. As you apply the throttle, and especially as you hit boost, that kind of spikes exponentially, right? It's not a line. It's kind of, I don't know what you want to call this, square root type of line or graph. So, and every car will have it a little bit differently. Oftentimes, the smoother this line, the better your intake is, the smoother the intake track, so to speak. The way to modify this is to look at your log. So let's open your log for light driving in Excel. Got it. And the 2 important things you look at are the air fuel correction, which is instant correction, and air fuel learning. Those are the fuel trims. So you can see that for a lot of the driving here, I'm just scrolling. The instant correction, it will fluctuate. So you'll get up to 14 degrees of fuel added, then you'll get like couple degrees removed. But the learning oftentimes stays pretty steady. Over time, your ECU learns whether it should be adding a bit of fuel, you know, a couple percent here and there. In a nutshell, rule of thumb, if your air fuel correction or air fuel learning is well under 5%, the tune is pretty good. Still, there could be some choppiness. Manually discovering all this and dialing it in is a lot of work. But the map scaling tool grabs these values along with a couple others and recalculates what your grams per second values should be at different voltages. So let me show you how that works. This is where I was trying to use the RomRaider editor. I'll tell you why. The vertical styling of the ECU flash tables doesn't translate well. So like imagine this, if I copy this table, copy table, it doesn't translate well into the map scaling tool because it's all horizontal, very similar to RomRaider. And so it's kind of a nuisance. I guess if you want to know my trick, I might as well go through it. What I do is I use like a mock map. So I'll open it. I will go to all my maps. There's a lot of them. So WRX template. This is probably off of a WRX like an 08, probably something that RomRaider was still able to open normally. All I ever use on this is the map scaling and the open source open loop fueling, because those two are needed by the MAF scaling tool. Okay, let me go find the MAF scaling. So for example, what I do is I copy from your tune into my middleman template tune, paste it, save it, no biggie. Cool. And it's kind of not fun to do this, but luckily the MAF scaling tool is so good, you only have to do this like once or twice, unless you make major modifications to your intake often. Then there's the primary open loop fueling. So this one is from your map. We're going to go open the same one in the template tune. Boom. It looks like we're a direct match. This is good. Some ECUs have different resolutions. Now that's a difficult thing to deal with. You'll see that in my template tune, I do go up to a 3.5 in terms of the scaling and the engine load, and then I go to a 3 and 2.7. We're going to look a little later at the logs and see how much load the engine actually achieves, and we're probably going to have to rescale a little bit for that in the tune. Yeah, let's copy the data. ECU Flash is a little more crude, I believe, in terms of how the editing suite is, or the tools, but you got to work with what you got, you know. I'm definitely grateful to the people that developed this super awesome free tools. The RPM stuff, of course, is the same. So boom, we saved our template. Boom, boom. I'm going to close the template so that when I reopen it next time, it will be updated. Sweet. Now, in RomRaider editor, I can open that same template and it will actually work because I have the correct definitions for that ECU image. So all we need is the primary open loop fueling, exactly what we got from your map. And on the left-hand side, MAF scaling, there it is. So you can see how it's styled way differently. This is the way and the format that MAF scaling likes. Copy the table, go to MAF scaling. So there's a lot of options at the top here. The ones we want are closed loop and open loop. There are other load comp tables. It's probably going to be, we're probably going to be sitting here for hours trying to explain all this, but the main ones to get your tune dialed in are the MAF scaling ones. So paste that in, and then you want to load your fueling. So same thing, go to edit, copy table, copy the whole table. POL, primary open loop fueling, paste it, hit the validate button. It's going to validate it, say okay. Cool. So we're kind of set up to bring in your logs. Let's jump out of here, go to downloads, where the stuff is. Where are the downloads? Downloads. Our logs, we're going to use the 1 through 6 throttle. Hit yes. And so there's things that you should be logging in your logs to make this work. Or to, if you don't have them, it's not really, the tool's not really going to work for you. So you need engine speed, engine load, AFR, learning, AFR correction, those two columns I told you about earlier. The MAF voltage. The stock AFR just means the front O2 sensor, like that's what it's reading, so we want to know. Intake air temp is important, and there's time. Your log will definitely have a time value. We just add that. I think some people may have issues with the closed loop, open loop. The easiest way to get this to work is in the log itself, add another column and just give the closed loop status a value of 8. So here's the depiction. Closed loop means is usually 8. Open loop is 7, especially for like the open source logging. In COB, open source or closed loop means a 0 and open loop is a 1. So there's a couple definitions. ECU tech does it differently. Anyway, long story short, we need to add a closed loop, open loop status column to your log and give it all of the rows a value of 8. Super fun stuff. Not really. I usually try to just get this to log correctly within the car. The more accurate and the more necessary stuff you log, the easier the process. CL/open loop. Give this a value of 8. There's data already there. That's fine. Copy. And we're just gonna here. This might not work as well if you did a bunch of wide open throttle pulls in this log sequence, but it's okay. Okay, why did you not paste 8 everywhere? The enemy of tuning is tedious manual work and clicking around. People just want to make changes and to see their car go faster, stronger, better, harder. Okay, let's reload the log. This time we should have our statuses. There you go, closed loop, open loop, miraculously added. Again, status of 8 for closed loop. That's the normal light throttle driving. Open loop is when you mash on the throttle. Okay, string index out of range, 7. What does that mean? Goodness. Not fun. What are you unhappy about? Definitely not my favorite. Let's see if we need to remove anything. All of this seems fine. I'm looking at the IM value. That's a 1. I don't think I need it. I'm just going to experiment by removing a column, resaving that. I don't need the SI drive. Here's a recommendation. Maybe remove the SI drive mode and try to minimize the number of parameters you log, because the ECU begins to freeze up if you log way too many things at once. That helps. Okay, fueling is still there as we entered. It stays there as long as you keep the program open. Closed loop, open loop, everything else looks correct. Java language, string index out of bounds exception, string index out of range, 7. Okay, let me figure this out. Just for the sake of time, I'm not going to get hung up on the closed loop. I'm going to jump over to the open loop section. It's very similar in how it does things, but I believe we have enough logs to do the open loop map scaling. Okay, similarly, here you are required to put your current map scaling values. Paste them in. I think the open loop fueling will be the same, reused from the closed loop side. And let's bring in the third gear pull log that we had. Let's take a look at it. Hopefully we have all the data we need. All right, we've got everything we need, except for it's saying we need the ECU target AFR, which is usually the final fueling requested. And I don't have that either, sadly. Okay, I'm gonna grab another log, but I guess I'm not gonna be able to edit this exact map today. But I just want to show the tool in action. Come on, give me a good log, somebody. Cool, okay. ECU target AFR. It seems to me like I just don't have any great logs at the moment. Let me do one thing. I think there was an asterisk beside that value, so it might let us fly. Okay, so what this does is when you upload a wide open throttle pull, it'll pull in the air fuel ratio error. It'll pull in that MAF sensor voltage value, the engine speed, and you can load multiple logs, which I like about this tool. So let's also pull in the fourth gear. Cool. Also, one nice long pull. This helps. The error percentages are not bad. It's kind of meh beginning at 3K, but I see it really cleans up as we go. So let's let the tool do its magic. On the top right, there's a go button. Boom, hit that. And so this is your new corrected MAF scaling graph. You can also hit the current button and it will pop up in red your like values that you entered in before. And so you can see they're almost a perfect match, but still there's a few percent of deviation. You'll notice that it kind of starts the corrections from the 3.0 point and on, because most of the stuff under here is the closed loop. So that's what we would have gotten if we had all the data we needed, especially the closed loop, open loop status, if it was happy with my Excel file, but it's not. It would have shown you adjustments here. I'm gonna bet that this is dialed in pretty good as well, and there's gonna be minimal adjustment, so to speak, in that graph. So the way to get these numbers, you can do a couple things. You can copy it for RomRaider, and you can go use your middleman template again. So you go and paste it. In RomRaider, it's nice when you paste, you'll see if a value has increased, it'll turn red. And if it has decreased, it'll turn, I think, like a gray or yellowish color. So that's one way. Or in the tool itself, you can copy just the values of the, not the voltages, but the grams of air. Kind of scroll, and then you right click and you copy vertical. Again, if you remember, the vertical values is how ECU Flash displays it. I'm going to open math scaling again. There's a lot of tables. So here's the verticals. Let's do a Command V and paste. Boom, pasted. So you saw there are some updates. Primarily here also, it'll highlight in kind of a gray when there's changes. And so you can see that we have a slight change. It's still very smooth, very good. I see a slight divot upward right here. No biggie. I've seen some bad math scaling graphs where it's just like all over the place. There's something clearly wrong, either in the TGVs, the intake is blocked, the cone filter is soggy wet sock, something like that. So let me save this. Cool. Okay, so that was plenty of fun and all. That's kind of like the boring stuff. I like to analyze logs, especially if you gave me like a fourth gear pull. I open it up, and I usually do a bit of investigation at various points there. So the big thing you want to look for is knock control. And I don't think we got any here, sadly. Okay, so again, it's very important. What I'll do is in the description, I'll again post a list of the utmost necessary parameters to log for all this tooling to work. That way you just go down there. You can set up your logger while I'm here. Let me go open my logger for RomRaider. You can set up your logger. Cool. And then once you've set up all the correct parameters to log, you can save your profile. Boom. You'll save it, and that way you will be able to, quickly go back later and reload a profile without spending half an hour of getting everything back. So for example, I was doing someone's WRX. Again, it won't show everything when you're not connected to the car. As soon as you connect to the car, most of the data will flow in that regard. Okay, let's see what data I can pull from this log. It's very important to monitor fine knock learning and feedback knock correction, which I don't see in this log. So I need to go pull another useful log. What this is pretty much, what I can tell you is maybe manifold relative pressure. You can see how much boost you hit. So we were hitting here about 17 psi of boost. The engine load is 3.9. So if you remember earlier, the calculated load for the engine or the car, it's pretty high, 3.9. So it's probably a good idea to rescale your tables. So I'll do that for this map, and that should help smooth a few things out in terms of fueling and ignition control and timing control. It's not bad. 17 psi, pretty good. I would again, really urge you to make sure that you monitor feedback knock, because if you see high negative values there, that means the engine was knocking and pulling back timing, and I can't really tell that off of here. Fueling looks good, so this column will be your fuel mixture. This is the lowest that the factory O2 sensor goes. You'll see that when you mashed the gas pedal, right, the fueling kind of first is lean and then it richens up as you hit boost, so to speak. So for example, you were off throttle here and then you probably hit the throttle right about there. And so there you're already in your full rich mixture. It might be a little too rich. In the map, I observed that there was a request for like 10.9 to 1 or even more rich. So here on the right side, this 10.8, that's pretty rich for a Subaru. A lot of people run 11 if they want to be pretty pig rich and safe. A lot of tuners will really carefully tune this to around 11.5, which is a desired air-fuel ratio. Also, it's important to note that other cars might run optimally at different or slightly leaner air-fuel ratios at wide open throttle, but the Subarus, as knock prone as they are, you got to give them a little bit extra rich mixture, so to speak. All right. So that being said, I want to reiterate, with the fueling from factory, there's a lot of jumpy cliffs and ups and downs. I'm a big proponent of smoothing out the transitions in fueling, also smoothing out the transitions in ignition timing. And wastegate, more or less, you can keep it smooth, you can make it more aggressive depending how hard you want your turbo to kick, or how hard you want it to come on to power. Tuning is like an art. It's very interesting, and everyone has their own style and they can figure out their own style. There's multiple ways to do it, and so that's the beauty of it. Looking at the target boost table or the table here, it's again working off of the requested torque. As you saw, in comfort mode, I think or intelligent mode, it was requesting 300-ish. In sport, 350-ish. And sport plus, it was like 400, but here you go up to 381, so whatever, it's just gonna hit the maximum. Note, this is an absolute pressure. So if we bust out your calculator, and if we're requesting 32.8, which is almost 33, subtract about 14.7 from that for sea level. That's what pressure is. So it looks like there's a request of about 18.3 psi on that sport sharp mode. In sport mode, it's a 30, so take like 1 or 2 psi off of this. It's going to be about 16.3. And then if you were in your intelligent mode at 31, that's very strange to me again, because look at this. There's values that are repeating. It goes to 31, then it goes back to 28, 29, 30, 31, and then it goes again to 32, 33. It's kind of misleading to me. What I recommend you do in this table is smooth these values out. There's an easy way to do this. So you can almost select like a block of the table. You can go to edit and you can interpolate, which means kind of like smooth out. You can do it either on a vertical axis or a horizontal axis. This one, I want it to be kind of vertically smoothed out. So check this out. The numbers are going to change. Boom. Now it's a much smoother transition of values. I want to do the same here. And I like the color coding because this doesn't make sense to me. You want like 20 here, and then you drop to 15 and you go back to 23. I don't exactly understand what that's for. It's a little bit, could be a little bit jarring while driving the car. So let's smooth that out. Boom. Easy peasy. Save. Okay, fueling wise, I don't want to mess around with it too much because again, the logs are not complete for me. at least the car logs and the tune that I'm working on right now in this instance. But you can also see that we have like 10.9, 10.8, then it goes to 11, and then it starts to drop back down again to 10.8. Like, I think we need to interpolate these values here to make them smooth, a smoother transition. I find cars are a little bit happier. I've tuned cars where they have knock, and I've, instead of decreasing timing in some areas, I actually increased the timing in places that had major dips, and the car completely figured itself out and the knock went away. So it's not always that you need to decrease the timing or give extra crazy fueling. Sometimes you need to work with smoothing out rough patches, just from some experience there. What else are we working with here? I'm trying to, so again, this is idle, 800 RPM, lowest load. 14.7 is the most desired air-fuel ratio in closed loop. As you hit higher RPMs, higher load with boost, that's when you're enriching the mixture going this way. What I recommend is look at how these values change as you progress in terms of load and RPM, and try to make these more smooth, right? I'm seeing 12.8, 12.3, then boom, it jumps to 12.6. It's a little bit jarring, to be most honest. So I can smooth this out as well. The interpolation tool helps a lot. You don't spend hours trying to interpolate stuff by hand or manually enter values. Let's see. Okay, save. There's a couple fueling tables. This is for like what they call additive below. I don't know what that means exactly. I tend to match the tables. It's easier in terms of logging and knowing which fueling is being used. I wouldn't touch the failsafe. The failsafe is usually when your IAM or DAM value drops to the floor. It's extremely rich to keep your car safe. I usually don't touch that. Also, this KCA alternate mode, I don't know exactly what it does, but it does look like someone before has modified it. So we're just going to edit it to match the other two tables. Okay, and then fail safes, I don't touch mostly. Cool. We modified a little bit of the target boost, as you saw. We smoothed out some of those values. I'm going to check the initial wastegate values. So it looks like these wastegate values are pretty high. I'm not exactly sure how you're going to give 107% wastegate. Let's just switch that down to 100. It's honestly trying to give a lot of wastegate, especially if this is a 3-port boost controller. And I'm also kind of confused because the initial wastegate value is higher than the maximum. You usually don't want that. You usually want the initial lower than the maximum so that if it needs more, it can climb up there. I'm interested as to maybe how the car is not throwing any kind of codes in this regard, because these to me seem flipped. Here's a good rule of thumb. You want like 5-10% difference between these, because if your car has a big gap between these, it'll have a lot more room for compensation. And what that could cause is like boost spikes and then oscillations, where you'll feel the car will overboost, pull back a lot. You'll have a dip in power, and then it's like, oh no, I should be hitting my 18 PSI. And then it will again hit your maximum that you're allowing in the max table, and it'll be like a sine wave, which is not good. You want it nice and smooth. You want that smooth power. Let's do this. I'm gonna go by ear on these wastegate values because they're a little high, to be honest, for a 3-port and the amount of boost that we're requesting. So I'm gonna modify this if honestly we don't hit the boost we want or need. Here's an easy thing. So I copied the maximum over to the initial, and then I'm just going to do a multiplication. Multiply the data by 0.95, which will just lower it by 5%. So that should be more realistic. Again, the car can sometimes, yeah, so we've got a max of 90. That's fine. We can keep it at 90. Okay. Turbo dynamics, usually don't touch that too much. That's the amount of control the ECU can do itself or give itself. Let's move on. The final thing that I might recommend touching on a little bit is just checking again the advanced tables for timing. Base timing cruise. I think honestly this 69 is a little high, especially for how aggressive that wastegate pressure looked. I would bump this down from 17 to like 16. And from 18 to 17.5. We'll give that a shot. The car could actually feel better with that set up that way. Again, smooth is fast. Big transitions and dips and drops and spikes are a no-no. There's 4 base timing. Okay, here's another thing that I noticed. This is your cruise table, so not on in wide open throttle. So I see that whoever tuned this, they were kind of trying to differentiate the two modes. I usually use the same table for everything. It's okay, whatever you decide to use. But I can tell now that wide open throttle, there's actually 14.8 degrees of timing, which makes more sense to me. That's what I'm more used to seeing in cars tuned with these modifications and this type of fueling, stock injectors. And so now if I look at the total timing, 14.8 plus 2.1, that's about 15, 16, 17, like 17, 18 degrees. Still pretty aggressive. I'm sure the car pulls hard if it's happy and there's no knock. So that's something to pay attention to. If you see knock, let's say in your log, you go and grab the engine load and the RPM, and then you go investigate why you saw knock there. Pretty much taking the data that your car gives you and jumping back into the tune, into the map, and figuring out why your car is unhappy. If it's happy, you can go and slowly up these numbers. Again, go drive, do a lot of data logging, make sure the car is happy. I know this video is getting a little long. I'll probably leave it at this. And if you guys have any questions, please do leave them in the comments. I'll have more of these coming out in the future. But this was just from my end, very brief introduction that it's super important to scale the math on your car for drivability. And especially, using the math scaling tool is a godsend. Thanks Vimsh for providing that. Huge thanks, because it saves you a lot of time, and then you spend most of your time tuning for fun stuff like power. That being said, I'm going to save this out and send it as a quick revision back to the owner. We can get the car flashed, and then I'll ask for better logs. Again, if you want all the needed parameters that are needed to run the math scaling tool, they're going to be listed in the description. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Take care. Good night.